I'm Vinnie Politan. The subject of my investigation, a series of bodies turning up in New England. And with each new discovery, the level of fear and speculation is growing in the community. And now everyone's wondering if there's a serial killer. Here's the story. A shroud of fear has settled over New England as a grim trail of death weaves through its serene landscapes. It began with the grim discovery of a woman found dead in a Connecticut river. Weeks later, another in a wooded area outside of Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Then, in Hartford, Connecticut, a woman's body discovered beneath a bridge, cold and lifeless, bearing strange markings authorities have not explained. Now, from Maine to Rhode Island, whispers spread like wildfire. This is no coincidence. Locals are fearing a serial killer stalks the Northeast, choosing victims with chilling precision. Each scene eerily clean. No signs of a struggle. No connections between the dead. Just silence, mystery, and a mounting panic. Social media is burning with speculation. Is it a former cop, a drifter, a cult? Police have issued some statements but have revealed very little. Is this just a series of unconnected cases or something else? The region holding its breath, wondering if evil is hiding in plain sight. As more bodies surface, one terrifying question grows louder and louder. Who will be next? It's scary. It's absolutely scary when there are bodies turning up and everyone is wondering, you know, the world that we live in. So at this point, take a look at this map, because this sort of lays it out. We say New England, but you can see where all these locations are: Norwalk, New Haven, you've got them in Groton, in Foster, in Springfield. Some of the areas where 5 of the bodies have been found, and these are 5 of the bodies that have been identified. Which brings us to the first question in our investigation tonight. What do we know about these cases? What facts are out there? If you're trying to see if there's a pattern or something, you need to get the facts of the case. And that's what we're going to do tonight in this program. Joining us, Court TV field reporter Cody Thomas and host and creator of Rhode Island Patrol, John DePietro, is with us. Cody joining us tonight. Cody, I know you've been on the road visiting all of these sites. Let's start with Norwalk, Connecticut. What do we know about what happened in Norwalk and what we found out about the victim here?
Well, of course, Vinny, there have been 8 bodies found across New England, mostly women, some unidentified, that have sparked those alleged serial killer rumors. And of course, I've been to just about all of those locations. Beginning in early March, that was when the first body was recovered in Norwalk. Take a look at me at the location. Rumors of the suspected New England serial killer all began in early March right here on Shanks Island in Norwalk, Connecticut. That is when police responded and recovered the body of 35-year-old Paige Fannin. This is actually, according to locals that we talked to here, where her clothing and personal items were found once police responded. Now, Paige was missing from West Islip, New York. She was down here visiting. Again, that was the spot where her personal belongings were found. And ultimately, that early March day, police searched with drones, with all their personnel, and eventually recovered her body from here in the Norwalk River. And of course, Vinny, that was a public park, a lot of foot traffic. There's people walking their dogs while we were there, out, some having their casting rods in the river fishing. So it's quite odd that she could just kind of vanish into thin air like that. It's sad and unfortunate.
And was there anything else that was significant about the victim? Anything we know about the victim and why she may have been in that area?
It's unclear at this time, Vinny. Again, she was from West Islip, New York. Her clothing and personal items were found right there, 35 years old. Unclear as to why exactly she was at that particular location on Shanks Island where the Norwalk River was, but again, unfortunately, that's where her body was recovered from.
All right, I want to go to one more, Cody. New Haven, Connecticut. What have you found out about New Haven, Connecticut?
Well, Vinny, that is where 59-year-old Denise Leary was found in a wooded area just a little bit away from her house. She had been missing for months. Take a look at this location. Now, this brings us here to New Haven, Connecticut, here in the 100 block of Rock Creek Road. Now, this area is where another one of the identified bodies, 59-year-old Denise Leary, was found. Denise had been missing since September of 2024. Her body was found in late March of 2025 in this heavily wooded area. She actually lived on this street, and in fact, she had settled with her family in Atlanta, Georgia for a bit of time, but moved back up here to New Haven in 2022 to take care of her mother, who had a stroke. But again, another one of the identified bodies found right here in this wooded area. And Vinny, with this particular victim, I actually spoke with a spokesperson for New Haven Police about the investigation. Take a listen to what he had to say.
She had some pretty severe mental health diagnoses that she was suffering from. Until we can definitively say, what killed her, we have to consider all options. But there's no indication from our perspective that Denise Leary was murdered.
And Vinny, you heard it right there. No word exactly her cause and manner of death. And he did also tell me that they are respectfully, allowing the family their privacy and not releasing too many details to the public as of right now.
All right, John DePietro, Rhode Island Patrol Live. Your thoughts about what is happening here in Norwalk and in New Haven? What do you think about these two particular cases?
Vinny, the thing about this is, and people need to understand maybe other parts of the country, but Amtrak calls this the Northeast Corridor. And it's a heavily traveled area where you start in New York and then you start to come north through Connecticut and into Rhode Island and then Massachusetts. And there's a lot of heavy traffic between, New York and Boston for a variety of different reasons. As far as the New Haven one, I was aware of that search. We do missing persons, and I was aware of that one. Two things about this that really stand out. The first one, someone visiting from Long Island, and then they turn up in a pretty public place, and it's still rather odd. As far as the New Haven one, that was a long time that she was missing and then found not that far from her home. So I've spoken to a number of people in the area. There's a lot of speculation that is it possible that she wasn't initially where she was found and maybe placed there. But you hit it, Vinny, at the very top by saying this has become a full-fledged panic. Everywhere I go, people are contacting me, asking me about it, whether it's in Massachusetts or Rhode Island or in Connecticut. All
right, Cody, let's continue and following your travels in the last few days. Groton, Connecticut, what can you tell us about that location?
Well, yeah, Vinny, this one was a little more gruesome than the rest. 58-year-old Suzanne Wormser, now identified, was found in Colonel Ledyard Cemetery. Take a look at this location. And now this brings us here to Groton, Connecticut, here at Colonel Ledyard Cemetery. Now, the interesting thing about the victim and the body found at this location was that it was found dismembered in a suitcase. A passerby was walking down the sidewalk, noticed for a couple of weeks this suitcase sitting in the same spot, not moving. She thought it was suspicious. She called authorities. Authorities then came, noticed the suitcase, unzipped the suitcase to ultimately find that body, later identified as 58-year-old Suzanne Wormser. Now, the interesting thing about this particular victim, there has been an arrest made. 68-year-old Donald Koffel was arrested in late April and charged with her murder, and authorities say the two were roommates. And Vinny, this is actually the only one with an arrest made in relation to the body in death.
Yeah, and there's a connection between the victim and the suspect in the case. So that I kind of understand that one. Tell me about Foster, Rhode Island.
Yeah, Vinny, this is where 56-year-old Michelle Romano was found in a wooded area. She had been missing since August of 2024 in a kind of secluded wooded area as well. Take a look. This now brings us here to this road. This road is Plainfield Pike here in Foster, Rhode Island. This is also the site where now identified 56-year-old Michelle Romano's remains were found. Now, she had been missing since August of 2024. And interesting about this one, it's being investigated by the Rhode Island State Police as a suspicious death because her family doesn't believe that she just up and died. Her remains were found in late March. Now, of course, Vinny, that investigation is still ongoing, but you just heard me right there. It is being investigated as suspicious.
John DePietro, what can you tell us about what happened in Foster, Rhode Island?
Well, this one, Vinny, I definitely know. 3 years ago, a woman went missing from Warwick, Rhode Island, Charlotte Lester. I went very heavy on that case. Charlotte's body was found this past November, less than a year ago, by a hunter. Her remains were found there in a shallow grave. There was an arrest made. Because of my work on the Lester case, I started dealing with Michelle Romano's family last fall. We did a series of videos, Vinny, in October, November, trying to draw awareness to the case. And then suddenly she is found there now. And he's exactly right, in Foster. Now, I've heard that it was in a ravine that she was found and by someone that was just out on a nature walk. So they found her. They revealed that the remains were identified positively as Michelle on Monday. On Tuesday, I was at the house where she had been staying in Warwick, and Vinny, for 2 days, the state police tore that place apart. Right now, there's still been no arrest. They continue to say it's a suspicious death, but something that's really important is there's a couple of things. Number one, there's no way she walked there. It's far that somehow the question is, how did she get there? How did she end up there? Also, state police put out a bulletin. They're looking for video footage. That's a kind of a desolate area where she was found off of, looking for any video footage, but only from February and March. So that leads to speculation. Is it possible that she had been taken somewhere else and lost her life and then placed there? This certainly got a lot of attention simply because we've been trying to build momentum for her disappearance.
Absolutely. All right, we have one more I want to get to right now. Springfield, Massachusetts, Cody.
Yeah, Vinny, 45-year-old Megan Meredith found unresponsive in a heavily populated area, Vinny, just about a block away from the NBA Hall of Fame. Take a look. Here now in Springfield, Massachusetts, right here on Hall of Fame Avenue. The Basketball Hall of Fame is just behind me over that building. Now, if you look over here to my left, that is the bike path where victim 45-year-old Megan Meredith was found by authorities unresponsive in late April. Now, the key about this case is it's actually being investigated as a homicide, but with no word on arrests just yet. And again, her body was found in late April. And Vinny, while I was there with as heavily populated as it was, with all the foot traffic going on, with her being found in broad daylight unresponsive, it makes sense as to why it's being investigated as a homicide case.
Absolutely, and that location a little different than the rest, and that's interesting. All right, Cody and John are going to stay with us. When we come back, we're going to take a look at the unidentified bodies. What do we know about those cases?
We want to catch that person.
Just look at that touch from Trinity Rodman.
Saturday night.
When she is on the field, she changes the game.
Saturday night.
Saturday night is our night.
The new Saturday Night Out is on ION all season long.
Does Karen Reed a killer girlfriend?
She's guilty.
Or the scapegoat in an elaborate cover-up?
Karen Reed was brave.
You know who did it.
The Karen Reed murder retrial. Live coverage weekday mornings, 8, 7 Central on Court TV.
If we had an indication like that there was someone out there killing people, like, we want to catch that person. You know, again, that's what we're here for.
With all these bodies turning up, there is fear that there is a serial killer. So we're taking a look at some of these cases. We went through 5 where the victims have been identified. I want to take a look at 3 of the cases where the bodies have not been identified. Let me show you on the map where they were found, where they were recovered. 2 in Massachusetts, Framingham and Plymouth, and 1 in Killingley, Connecticut. But as you know, in New England, the states seemingly overlap with one another as you look at the area we're talking about. So this brings us to the next question in our investigation involving these 3 cases. What do we know about these cases where the bodies have not been identified? Still with us, Court TV field reporter Cody Thomas, who's been on the road in New England tracking all the locations here, and John DePietro as well, host and creator of Rhode Island Patrol Live. Okay, Cody, what can you tell us about Plymouth, Massachusetts?
Well, of course, Vinny, those remains unidentified, and they were found in a wooded area off of State Highway 3 in Massachusetts. Take a look at this location. So now we're here in Plymouth, Massachusetts, right off of Route 3. You can see the cars going down the state highway here behind me across that bridge. Now it's in this area that a hunter says he was walking through a wooded area tracking deer. Then he came across some bones that he initially thought were animal bones. But after he looked at them further, he noticed they were a little more rounded than what he'd seen in previous animal bones. So then he called authorities, and once authorities came out, they determined that those remains were a human skull. And those remains were also found in March. And again, Vinny, no word on any identification there just yet. And also, Vinny, unidentified remains found in Killingley, Connecticut. We haven't made it there just yet, but authorities say that those remains are likely a woman. So there's a possible lead there.
John DePietro, let me ask you about Killingley, Connecticut. What do you know about that location and what was discovered?
Vinny, what's interesting about that is several things. First of all, it was only about 10 miles away from where the remains were found of Michelle Romano, right over the Rhode Island, Connecticut line, and actually even about 10 days after Michelle had been found. Now, Killingley is not that far from 2 major casinos. I've talked to police. You know, casinos can be very transient. Certain people, if someone wanted to go and meet someone or pick someone up, casinos they're open 24/7. So as much as some of these are desolate, the situation in Killingley is it's not that far from 2 casinos. And something else, Vinny, that people should understand is many times, and I don't want to be gruesome, but medical examiners that I've spoken to, when they're trying to determine that if someone is buried for a long time, and again, not to be grotesque or so forth, but animals can sometimes come into play. And so the question becomes, was the person dismembered by the individual when they disappeared, or is it just because they've been out there and then the wilderness takes over? But the element of Killingley that really caught people's attention is just how close it was to Michelle Romano's remains. I mean, 2 women, 10 days apart, and very, very close. Very, very unusual, if not unprecedented.
And again, it's something that when the public hears this, they're going to be a little alarmed and saying, you know, what is going on here? Cody, tell us about Framingham now.
Well, Vinny, what's interesting about this particular case is that these remains were found almost accidentally off of the Massachusetts Turnpike. Take a look. We're here now in Framingham, Massachusetts, right here on the Massachusetts Turnpike on exit 117 to be exact. Now, in this wooded brush behind me is where authorities say they found an unidentified body. They were responding to a brush fire back here in this wooded area when they say they came across the remains. Now, they say information gathered immediately from the scene does not actually suggest foul play, but even then, an investigation is still underway. So, Vinny, we have 8 bodies, all in these distinct, unique locations, some of them being investigated as suspicious, some being investigated as a homicide, one with an arrest. Very strange things going on up here in New England.
Let me ask you, Cody, from your perspective, because you're traveling from location to location to location, overall, was there any sort of common denominator in the majority of these locations where you went?
Vinny, the only thing I noticed, of course, they were spread out hours and miles apart, but I noticed that a handful of them were found in wooded areas. That's the only real common denominator that I found, and right off of roads also, wooded areas that are right off of roads or state highways and things like that. So that was the foundation of almost every single one that I saw.
All right, if we could put up on the screen where the 8 locations are. And John DePietro, from your perspective, you're a native, you're from this area. What does this tell you when you look at all of these locations? Does it tell a story at all, or is it seemingly random? Is there any sort of nexus among these locations?
Vinny, what's so unusual about this is, number one, just that you're talking about, that's not a large area, and you're exactly right, the states do overlap. But as I've talked to the different police, something that comes into play is all of these different victims, for the most part, not all, but they all have different law enforcement agencies enforcing them. If it was a bigger state, if it was Florida, Texas, Michigan, California, you'd probably have, one unit. But you have all these different police organizations that are investigating this. Now, I have found that normally they don't always communicate with a lot of different crimes. They've started to communicate now because they want to make sure that something isn't slipping through the cracks. If there is something that does link in, as I said, the corridor of New York to Boston, Vinny, there are people sometimes that use it as a crime wave, and they just come through these New England states. Many of the towns where these are found, they are somewhat sleepy towns. You don't have very aggressive police forces. They don't deal with a lot of that. So right now, I think the remains that have not been identified, that's what's really sparking the most interest from both the public and the police.
Absolutely. Well, John DePietro, we appreciate your time and your insight. We know we're going to call on you again. Cody Thomas on the case for us, as always, bringing us the facts. Cody, thank you so much. Up next, we're going to bring in some of our experts who study the minds of these types of killers and ask the question, are these cases potentially connected? I'm Vinnie Politan. We continue our investigation of the series of bodies that have turned up in New England. It's incredibly tragic, but now increasingly scary for the community. People are wondering, what is going on? Who is responsible? And most importantly, is there a serial killer on the loose? Court TV field reporter Cody Thomas is on the case and visited the death scenes in New England. Let's take a look.
Rumors of the suspected New England serial killer all began in early March right here on Shanks Island in Norwalk, Connecticut. That is when police responded and recovered the body of 35-year-old Paige Fannin. Now, this brings us here to New Haven, Connecticut. This area is where another one of the identified bodies, 59-year-old Denise Leary, was found. And now this brings us here to Groton, Connecticut. Now, the interesting thing about the victim and the body found at this location was that it was found dismembered in a suitcase. This now brings us here to this road. This road is Plainfield Pike here in Foster, Rhode Island. This is also the site where now identified 56-year-old Michelle Romano's remains were found. Now, it's in this area that a hunter says he was walking through a wooded area tracking deer. Then he came across some bones. Here now in Springfield, Massachusetts, right here on Hall of Fame Avenue. The Basketball Hall of Fame is just behind me over that building. Now, if you look over here to my left, that is the bike path where victim 45-year-old Megan Meredith was found by authorities unresponsive in late April. And this wooded brush behind me is where authorities say they found an unidentified body. They were responding to a brush fire. An investigation is still underway.
It's kind of jarring when you think about it that way. It's almost overwhelming, which is why the community is absolutely concerned. Take a look. The bodies here found across 3 different states, early March to late April. That's not a long time. Like, bodies are popping up, each week, it seems. Some victims were not from the area where they were found. One was found dismembered in a suitcase at a cemetery, and others were found near roads and near woods and water as well. And that brings us to an incredibly important question in our investigation. Are these cases potentially connected? That's what everyone wants to know. Are they connected? Could one person, one or more, be responsible for what's happening in maybe not all, but perhaps a majority of these cases? Joining us, author and professor. She has spent decades studying the criminal mind and works with the Cold Case Foundation and has been studying these cases as well. Ann Burgess is with us, and clinical and forensic psychologist, researcher, expert on violent crime, and the author of The New Evil, who has also been looking at all of these cases, Dr. Gary Brucato. Thank you both for being here. Okay, are these cases potentially connected? Ann Burgess, what do you think?
Well, what I think is that they certainly are suspicious for being either being what we call signature crimes or linked crimes. And it has some patterns in terms of where they're found. I think that all or almost all of the cases are found by somebody else rather than people that are out looking for them. That's very interesting and very important, which suggests, could they have been moved? Could they have died in one place and then moved to another place? In fact, one of the cases, it's a fair length of distance between where they feel she was last seen and where she was found. So those are all important in the location. The age is also interesting. They range from the women from 35 to close to 60. That's a little bit older than we normally see on some of these linkage cases, but those are all factors to be considered.
Dr. Gary Brucato, what are you seeing in terms of any connections or lack of connections?
What I think is very interesting is that this case or series of cases has the potential to be a little bit of a cautionary tale with regard to case linkage. I think what's interesting about it is that some of the cases with a little bit more information may turn out to be related, and some of them may not. Some of the cases, for example, smack more of what we see in things that turn out to be unrelated homicides. For example, there's been someone arrested in the suitcase incident. And in that case, where there was reportedly a confession, it was apparently about cocaine, a financial matter related to cocaine. And cocaine crimes, we can see incredible mutilation, dismemberment, things like that. And that can really make people in the general public say, wow, there's some kind of serial killing butcher out there. And so that can mislead you. There are also cases that are suggestive potentially of suicide. People found floating in rivers, things like that. People can be moved great distances by rivers. And so, you know, what I think is we have to be very careful. Now, regarding the ones that may be linked, what I agree with Dr. Burgess absolutely is very interesting is that finding them in woods and where there is apparently some effort at concealment is suggestive of some kind of organized person that has taken somebody someplace and sort of made it difficult to find them. And that is something that we don't tend to see in garden variety homicides. That is something that can suggest somebody with a kind of a forethought and cool-headedness and meticulousness. And I think those cases are especially interesting in terms of potential linkage.
Dr. Burgess, you know, something that happens here, and I think as we're taking a look at some of the profiles of some of the players in all this, something that I think happens when we watch television dramas, you know, it's always law enforcement downplaying, there's no serial killer, they don't want panic in the community, etc. And sometimes it does turn out to be a serial killer, sometimes it doesn't, obviously. But what are your thoughts about the timing on when and how you can come to some determination one way or the other? Because it is, in the case of a serial killer, that's when the concern really hits the public, right? If there is some connection and there's a killer on the loose, then everyone is scared. I remember being a child when the Son of Sam, the .44 caliber killer, was on the loose. I was scared, and I was in New Jersey, a young boy in New Jersey, and I was scared. What are your thoughts about when you can make some sort of a definitive statement one way or the other?
Well, certainly when you have a suspect that you get a confession from, we did see that in one of the cases. Now, it happened to be a domestic type of case. It was not a case where it looked in any way. That was the one where the cocaine and the body was in a suitcase and things like that. Now, the suitcase was interesting because there has recently been a case out of Florida for that type of case where a man was left for dead in a suitcase. So you wonder how much that had to do with anything up here. But the other factor that's so important, I think, is in the timing and who finds it, and if some of the evidence may get looked over. Obviously, when a body is in the water, you're not going to have a lot of evidence. But look at how many bodies were near water, or at least in water or near water. That seems quite unusual. The woods, I think Dr. Bricata also mentioned about that. So you've got enough patterns there of places where people are being found. The other thing is these are not big cities. This isn't like New York City or even Boston. These are more rural to some degree. Which is rather interesting, and what that means would be important. I think the other that I wish that we had some, and maybe they do have information on it, is when you have them in the woods and they're left there for a while, you get what's called some types of insects that might give you some clues as to where and how long they have been. So some of these forensic types of analysis that can be done on evidence is what we may find at some point. Then that gets to the suspect. What type of suspect would be doing that or knowing the area? Clearly, in some of the cases, it had to be someone that, if it was somebody who knew that area, that it wasn't something that just a stranger might come across.
Dr. Gary Brucato, how important is it to take a look at the victims and to see if there's any links between the victims, whether it's what they do, what they look like, where they're from, things like that? How important is that to try to figure out a profile for each individual case and then see if there is a link?
Well, the victimology is profoundly important when one is trying to create a profile, because serial killers, who are almost invariably, if you were to lay out the different types, you'd see that the vast majority of them are sexual in nature, driven by fantasy, sexual fantasy as a way of playing out needs for domination, control, manipulation, so forth, leveling the playing field in life. We see that they are very fantasy-oriented in the sense of needing very particular types of victims, or preying on people that would be sort of invisible, so that they can harm these, hitchhikers, prostitutes, people like this, that, sex workers, people that are going to be invisible a little bit. And what I think is that in this case, the victimology is seemingly so random. There are even males mixed into the story here, that it's very difficult to get a sense of what the heck happened. We also don't have any clues at all of sexual aspects. We would need a lot of information to understand that. Simple example, in the first case in Norfolk, the woman that comes from West Islip in New York and is then found in New Haven, Norfolk, in the river. I had heard a report that her clothes and some possessions were found on the banks there near her. Now, this is important because if they just sort of traveled with her and the tide took some things off and they washed up and so forth, that's one story. Another story is that they were left there intentionally. Then we have to wonder, why are the victims' clothes off of her? Is there a sexual component? So I think that this is an example where we need a great deal more information. The other thing I think is very important to point out is that people are getting spooked, I think, by what looks like a very rapid progression, where we have to remember that serial killers tend to have cooling off periods. People on sprees will go out and kill all kinds of people very quickly with no breaks. But this is something where these people were probably killed many months apart, and their remains were hidden well and just sort of left out there.
Absolutely.
And I think we have to understand that if this were one person, or some of them is one person, it's been busy for a while, and it's all just coming to light now.
Hold the rest of that thought. We've got more with Dr. Ann Burgess and Dr. Gary Brucato still to come. What's really going on here?
Until we can definitively say, what killed her, we have to consider all options.
How do you explain it? Two teenagers, they go from zero to the worst crime anyone can imagine.
She wanted to get her mom out of her life, to kill her.
You turned to murder.
Yes.
You are a shrewd operator.
I'm done with this interview. You're trying to make me seem like I'm a monster, and I'm not. Let me out.
Interview with a Killer. New episode, Sunday at 8 on Court TV.
Now, the interesting thing about this particular victim, there has been an arrest made. 68-year-old Donald Koffel, and authorities say the two were roommates. And interesting about this one, it's being investigated by the Rhode Island State Police as a suspicious death. And once authorities came out, they determined that those remains were a human skull. Now, the key about this case is it's actually being investigated as a homicide, but with no word on arrests just yet. Now, they say information gathered immediately from the scene does not actually suggest foul play, but even then, an investigation is still underway.
A lot of bodies, a lot of fear, and a few answers coming out. I want you to take a listen to the New Haven police here talking about a couple of the cases.
If you look at our investigation in its totality, there's no indication that there was any form of criminality, anything like that. We actually, I don't know if you follow, there was just an arrest was made there was the body parts in a suitcase that was found. The person who was just arrested, and again, an arrest is, not an indication of guilt per se. Everyone needs their day of, their day in court. But the person who was arrested was this person's roommate, I believe. So we see no connection between that person and Miss Leary. We see no indication of criminality at all. And again, this is subject to change. So, the investigation, until we can definitively say, what killed her, we have to consider all options.
I think it's a pretty honest answer from New Haven police. Talk about, okay, in the case here, no criminality, someone's been arrested the other, but we have to keep all options open because we really don't know. Which brings us to the next question in our investigation. What's really going on here, right? That's the other part. Like, if they're connected or if they're not connected, what is really going on here, and how do you get to that answer? Still with us, Dr. Ann Burgess and Dr. Gary Brucato. Let me ask you, Dr. Burgess, do you think in a case like this where you've got all these different jurisdictions that are investigating them, that they need maybe someone to take a look at all the cases, maybe a profiler or maybe a small task force to look at everything just to make sure or to see if there are any connections, to have like one set of eyes looking at everything?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent suggestion, and it's and perhaps they are thinking of it. We certainly hope they are thinking of it. You usually would, because these are fairly close cases, and when you just look at the geography of it. And somebody that isn't involved to come in and take a look at what's available, because I know there's more information that's available, but not to the public, so nothing that we can look at. And that would make most sense. The jurisdictional issue in any type of law enforcement case is really, really important. And I've certainly, in my career, seen problems when you don't get people talking together or sharing information. It's really sharing the information. It can get, it really can be a big barrier. So I think that's number one. The other is they probably are talking with people that they're trying to find suspects that are known to the victim. And I think that's where the case you just talked about up in New Haven came about. It was somebody that was living in the same building, I think, with this victim. And even when we looked at what was getting known to the public, they had to do several interviews before he was able to give them any kind of confession. And they did get it. So you may be getting some of that in some of these cases, because some of these, one is clearly being investigated as a homicide. That's what the law enforcement says, so that you know that there are at least several of these very suspicious ones that, if they're not being looked at as a task force, should be. So I very much think your suggestion should be taken very seriously.
Dr. Gary Brucato, if there is a killer or killers, do you think with all this publicity that's happening now that they are paying attention to what people are saying in the news?
Well, it's a little complicated. First of all,
I don't ask you easy questions, Dr. Brucato. You're not here for the easy ones. You're here for the hard ones.
But I don't give easy answers either, because I can go on and on. But the thing is that what I think is that if there is one or more people that are responsible for one or more of these offenses, and it is of a serial nature, a person would be watching likely for two reasons. One, to make sure that the authorities are not ahead of them, to sort of get a sense of how frightened people are and all that. So they might have to be more cautious, so forth. But the other reason, of course, would be to devour and enjoy the infamy that would be associated with this. And so as a consequence, we tend to see, particularly in serial killers that are not overtly sexually motivated, for example, the Zodiac killer, Ted Kaczynski, the son of Sam, what you see in that type of person is a lot more of an expression of domination and control through manipulation of the media, writing letters, things like that. And so if there is something like that going on, we'd really have to understand the motive to make a guess about what this type of person will be doing in the shadows. My strong sense, based on what we're seeing so far, is we need a lot more information. A couple of these cases are suspicious for potential linkage, and some of them I think we're going to find out have other explanations. But we'll see. But some of them are certainly suspicious.
Dr. Ann Burgess, we have about 20 seconds left here. What are your final thoughts tonight? And how about for folks who live in New England? Do you believe they should be concerned?
My final thoughts are, if any of these victims or these persons we've been talking about have been murdered, it really needs to be solved. Whether it's a serial killer or a single person or double murder, something like that, really needs to be solved, because I think this is important for the community. This has alerted the community, and I think that's important, that you want to keep your community under control. And it could be because there are so many that are kind of in a very small area and they're reading from different media pieces about how the investigations are going. I think they even have a website.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this is important. You have to really try to do what we can to get the information, get something.
I hate cutting off Dr. Ann Burgess, but we're out of time. The best in the business. Dr. Ann Burgess, Dr. Gary Brucato, thank you both so much. Until the cases are solved and arrests are made and convictions are obtained, there will continue to be many questions from the community. When this happens, it really requires extra transparency from law enforcement to do everything possible to help the public understand what is really happening. The best way to do this is just be open and honest and address all the questions. I'm Vinnie Politan. We'll keep digging for answers as the investigation continues.